jump into the whiskey, do you want to give us the order that we're going to be going in tonight, and then maybe if a quick introduction to yourself, Mike, and your background with the brand and in the industry?
Yeah, sure. So I thought the best order, or I should say my favorite order, would probably be to start with the King Car, and then move on to Podium, and then Concertmaster, then jump over to the Triple Sherry and finish on the Solist, which I believe you said was the Solist Port,
Yes, Solist
which
Port
is
is what
good
everyone
because
has at home. I hope
that's
so
the one
anyway.
I've got. So
Yeah. No, that looks correct. Brilliant. Well, that's exciting. So how long have you been with Kavalan? Do you want to give us a bit before we get started on the whiskey, a bit of kind of, your journey in the spirits industry? We were saying before you came on that you've been in it for, it was about 10 years, was it?
I've been so I used to
Or maybe
tend
that was
bar.
living in London for 10 years. My apologies.
I actually I did a degree in archaeology, and this was right at the time when we had the first of however many financial crashes it's been. I've lost track.
At least
So
three, I'd say, but
it was definitely number one. Um, then I walked into a pub. From a pub, I ended up working in cocktail bars. Cocktail bars ended up making beer for beer bars when the craft beer revolution thing was kind of happening. Ended up landing in another cocktail bar before being picked up by a distillery called East London Liquor Company, which is actually not too far away from where I am now. And I worked there for 10 years, and that's really where I learned how to mostly about production. So we made three different types of gin. They make some very good whiskeys of many different varieties and types. And then about a year and a half ago, a friend of mine named Nathan, who has been working for the company I work for now, Speciality, for quite some time, contacted me, and he knew I was a fan of Kavalan and Nika and Michter's, which are three of the brands that we look after. And he basically said that he was kind of tired about talking about whiskey. Would I like to come and learn new production methods and new techniques and what other companies are doing? So I said yes. And now I get paid to talk about whiskey that I genuinely really like, which doesn't, I feel like I shouldn't even say it out loud in case it jinxes it because it doesn't feel real, but it's kind of a thing.
no, that sounds very cool. And yeah, I mean, it's there's some very cool brands to work with as well, both historically and currently. I remember I first encountered this Kavalan back, I'd say I don't know, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. It was the Vino Baroque cask, and I
Won
just thought,
every
wow, this is,
award that year, just like ping, 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 just nailed
yeah,
it.
an absolutely stunning drop. We're going to start tonight on the King Car Concertmaster. And while we're getting that poured, Alex has said where the accent's from. If you want to maybe elaborate a bit on your background in that regard.
Oh, so I'm originally from Toronto, Toronto, Canada. Um, my mother is from New Jersey though, and I've kind of you know what, I lie to people a lot, and I always say I used to sound a lot more Canadian, but I've been over in England since 2000, and now my accent's getting less and less. But I've always just had this semi-Ontario monotone, but also pan North American accent. So it's like Canadian as much as it can be. Although I don't get very loud, and I apologize a lot. So I think those parts are still genuinely Canadian about me, but the rest is sort of kind of Upper East Coast somewhere, if
Very
that
good.
makes
I mean,
sense.
that's just perfect for the TikTok generation, That's really coming back, that mid-Atlantic kind of vibe, you know.
Well, that's definitely my demographic. I'm way too old for the TikTok generation, I think.
What are you talking about? I'm a TikTok celebrity. No,
Oh, see,
I'm not. I'm not on there, but just in case anyone tries to find me. The brilliant. So, do you want to tell us a bit about this first one? So, the King Car Conductor.
yeah, I mean, so I'll talk about, I guess the best way to go through this is I'll talk about why I picked this one first, because a lot about Kavalan really has to do with their history, which is quite short, but also a lot of the techniques and sort of stuff they've changed in the whiskey game, or at least sort of brought more into focus. Um, but King Car, so the one you're about to try or already trying, it's named after the parent company that owns Kavalan. So the King Car company is basically this kind of like I guess like a manufacturing mogul of a business. They make things like Mr. Black's coffee. They do Lucozade under contract in Taiwan. They design canning and pharmaceutical machines. They basically do everything. They do like a little bit of everything, which does kind of feed into the stereotype that I was aware of Taiwan, which is they're very good at making things. Because a lot of my toys in the 80s and 90s, if you flipped over them on the foot, it would say made in Taiwan. It just so happens they are very, very good at making things. That will come back into it. I'm just not just mentioning a stereotype for a throwaway remark. But the reason we're starting with this one is this kind of has a good sort of signature of what the DNA or what the good parts of the DNA of Kavalan are. And one of my favorite things about this brand and all the whiskeys they produce is, and this is potentially the wankiest thing I'm going to say, but it's a very good, like, it's very good diagnostically. Like they're so sort of clear with their base spirit and then how they age it and what they do to it, and the different types of maturation, that when you taste something like King Car, then we'll move on to Podium and Concertmaster and Solist, you'll be able to sort of get a good idea of what their base spirit is like and how that sort of expresses overall in the types of wood that we're familiar with. And then how things like specifically port versus sherry versus new oak versus ex-bourbon, etc., affects that spirit. So it's a pretty good way of sort of giving you showing off how good they are, but also giving you a very good baseline for the ones that we're going to try to see how different levels of maturation change it. And if I remember correctly, it's 46% ABV, not chill filtered, and in the bottle it's about 4.5 up till 8-year-old whiskey. Little thing about the shape as well, because this shape bottle, so the one that King Car normally comes in, will be in contrast to, I got some more Kavalan over here. Concertmaster normally comes in this shape bottle, 100 Taipei building. That's the one.
Oh, there you go.
One thing that's kind of cool, which I'm kind of glad they do it, although it's odd. Anything in this style of bottle will never be touching a first fill anything. So if it's touched ex-bourbon, it'll be second or third fill. If it's this shape bottle, it's usually first fill, I was going to say or above, but it doesn't really go above that. It's usually first fill for this one. So, please feel free to give it. Oh, yeah, cheers, everybody, by the way. Charles, ding.
Don't chat.
Don't wait for me for tasting. I'll give you a little bit of background about the history of this company, which I will not make exhaustive unless you ask me to, I suppose. But Taiwan. So obviously Taiwan's not been making whiskey for very long. It wasn't until, I think, in March 2000, they elected their first democratic leader. In 2002, they then joined the World Trade Organization. And one of the stipulations for joining the WTO is that you cannot have a monopoly on alcohol production in the country. So it was the first time legally Taiwan could make and then export whiskey. And so a guy by the name of Mr. T. Lee, who owned the King Car Company, decided that he wanted to, just so you know as well, as a little preamble, Taiwan consumes a profane amount of whiskey. Mr. T. Lee wanted to start making it. So this wasn't sort of out of the blue, one guy's sort of hair up his butt idea. This is definitely a good business choice. So he decided to set up the Kavalan distillery. And a couple cool things he did was he got a team of people together, some of whom had decent whiskey knowledge, some of whom had none, and sort of sent them all over the world to look at every type of fermentation, distillation, maturation, even the way they were growing oak to produce barrels with. They wanted to look at every part of every stage that they possibly could. So they went all over the world. They helped pioneer a couple cool things that I'll probably talk more about when we get to some of the other expressions. But essentially, after sending a team out, they returned to Taiwan. And I don't know how much you know about how difficult it is to set up a distillery, but a shovel broke ground. 9 months later, they had a functional distillery capable of producing, I think it was 20,000 liters at the time. So the place I used to work in, which is up the road from me, we had a 650-liter still and a 450-liter still. And to even get that place open took about 4.5 years. So the fact they did it in 9 months is kind of testament to the fact that when the Taiwanese want to make something, they will get it done, basically, in record neck-breaking speed, I would say.
That's impressive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird because I guess unless you've sort of heard about other comparisons, even getting stills made now, if you want to like contact Forsyths, there's a huge waiting list.
And where are the stills made?
So I believe they actually do have their hands on a mix at the moment because they did have some. Actually, let me just check my notes. I know they have Forsyths now, but I think they may also have an American still, although I don't have the sneaky notes up. Let me just send a text to Nathan and double check. But one of the cool things about their stills, which this is a bit of a thing that it's hard to explain because it doesn't really there's no difference in expression. But normally stills, you'll have a little off your line arm or the pipe that takes the alcohol vapor away from the stuff you're distilling. It'll then go into a condenser. which is one of the things that cools it back down into liquid. There is a condenser before their condenser. So it's a double condenser because Taiwan is obscenely hot. A nice place to have whiskey from, probably one of the more difficult places to work in a whiskey distillery in, I would say. Although
in terms of the kind of this style, like, you know, obviously it's no secret that the Japanese production took a huge inspiration directly from the Scots, like, you know, as lots of other countries have drawn their tradition from normally the Scotland or Ireland, really, going back even tracing back through American distillation history. But what was there a specific template that they were following?
I mean, I think if you look at it bare bones, the DNA of it is exactly what you'd expect to come out of Scotland. So raw ingredients that they only ever use barley, yeast and water, obviously local water sources, which we can talk about in a bit. The main difference, and one of the things that I think King Carr shows off particularly well, is they do mess around with their yeast a little bit. And I hope this doesn't get boring, but whenever you want to make any form of alcohol, you need sugar and you need yeast. And yeast essentially sort of breathe in that sugar and they exhale out booze, and that's where you get alcohol from. So normally, if you're making whiskey, especially in places like Scotland where it's very competitive, you tend to use what's called, there are a few strains of them, but distiller's yeast. And it's very, very good at turning sugar into alcohol. The thing is, there are uncountable amounts of yeast, different types, different varieties, and they evolve very, very rapidly. And whatever yeast are used to eating will affect what they burp, and what they burp quite genuinely turns into different flavors in your fermentation, which becomes different flavors in your whiskey. And it's very rare to see somebody messing around with lower yield yeasts, because really the less good those yeasts are at turning sugar into alcohol, the more expensive your product's going to become. If it's not really great at turning sugar into stuff, then that's kind of economically usually not considered good. However, yeast can produce some amazingly delicious things. And one of the cool things about Kavalan is they do use some distilling yeast. It's a French distilling yeast, but they've also incorporated some South African wine yeast into it. So they're much, much more used to feeding on big, crunchy grape sugars, along with oils and fats that produce really, really nice, bright and fruity esters. So one of the things I think that comes through on this, which you kind of get with some like more, I suppose, more modern styles of Japanese whiskey now, but the aroma on this for me, for a lot of the Kavalan, is very, very, very like almost apricot-y, stone fruity. And it also develops over time. It'll actually open up over time if you leave it out. Unless I leave it out forever, obviously, but give it a little bit of air and it gets better and better to me.
Oh, brilliant. We've got a few comments coming in there. Craig got a great question. I will come back to that one, Craig, so I'm not skipping it. I just we'll go through some of the tasting notes first. We're getting caramel and toffee on the nose, says Craig. Alex says nosing, getting grass, banana peel, marzipan, decent hit of alcohol. This is such a dessert, says James. Sweet, creamy, honeyed, then a creamy clove spice finish. Do Kavalan find it hard with the humid temperatures? Well, that's the same question that Craig asked. Maybe we'll come back to that one on the later whiskey, because it is a good one. But I kind of want to stick around with what we were saying there. This is, I would have guessed it was a higher ABV than it actually is, to be honest. And it's got some characteristics of an old Scotch, and I don't mean that in terms of aged old Scotch, but I mean, like, you know, if you try even a 12-year-old Scotch, but that was distilled laid down in the 1980s, they have some of those kind of heavier kind of notes that you don't kind of tend to get in modern Scotch whiskies. It's an interesting drop, Mikey.
It kind of reminds me of, and this is weird because I think some of the flavors you get from earlier distilled Scotch come from worse treatment of wood. Meant there was a lot more interaction with oxygen, and you get a lot more of that like almost like sherry rancio kind of flavor. Like it's got that bodega funk. Kavalan are ridiculously rigorous about their wood. So I've noticed that. I'm glad you said it, because I do detect that, even though their wood is not old and super porous. I don't even really chemically know where that comes from. It might be to do with how well how skillful they're fermenting their wort, but that's something I hope to find out. Actually, I hope to find out in a couple months when I go to Taiwan to see this setup. But I'm glad you said that, because I always, a lot of them are sherry finished, and you think, oh, well, is that just the sherry adding it to it? But it comes through in a lot of them, which I find very, very interesting. I don't know if I said this before already, but when you're tasting King Carr, you are looking at mostly ex-bourbon and a little bit of Oloroso. So this, like I said, everyone's kind of familiar with what ex-bourbons can bring to spirits, and the Oloroso here kind of gives it a little bit of that kind of like that weird sherry nuttiness with some slight fruit, but doesn't really get in the way of the rest of the spirit, which is why I picked this one, I think, for the first.
Excellent. You really do get that Oloroso. Ian says grassy caramel with a hint of mint on the nose. Catherine said this is nice and zingy on the tongue, reminds me of space dust / popping candy. Anyone else getting overripe bananas, says David and Catherine, or is COVID with my palate? I hope you're okay if you've got COVID. But I definitely get the overripe bananas. No,
Yeah,
definitely.
for sure.
Or maybe even like a banana bread element. Ian says sweet, spicy cinnamon fudge on the palate. That's getting tobacco, oak, woody, chili nuts, chili, honey nuts, hint of chili spice in the finish. Some fantastic tasty nuts there, folks. So yeah, I mean this one goes for, I think it's on sale at the moment for £84. So it's, I mean, for what it is, which sounds like as in it sounds like it tastes like such a mature and robust whiskey that's come from all the ways over the other side of the world. It's not bad, I suppose.
Also, just one, I don't have good recommendations for all of these. I haven't made cocktails in many years, but I have made some with this one. And there is a famous cocktail called the Sazerac. You're sort of looking at the best way to make these at home if anybody's ever interested. This makes a phenomenal banana Sazerac, which it's not like a real official thing, but works really well with this. You get like good creme de banane, a good, let's say officially 50, probably 60 or 70 mils of King Car. But what you do, you basically get a rocks glass, and then if you can't get an atomizer, and just spray absinthe inside of it. Then you use classic Peychaud's bitters, and you kind of basically make an old fashioned with an absinthe rinse, but with creme de banane instead of sugar syrup. This is like unbeatable. You could pre-batch it and leave it in your freezer and just pull it out whenever you need it, and it's awesome. Awesome. I would say.
It sounds good, although there's Sazerac enthusiasts spinning in their graves, but no, it does sound tasty. Never
okay
forget,
if they're
folks,
already dead, so I'll be fine.
yeah, the Sazerac was originally made with cognac, wasn't it? Anyway, so it's not like the Sazerac company have any real claim to it.
Yeah, and even then, most people now think of it as they're either say 50/50s or a rye base. So
yeah,
if anybody's really upset, I apologize, but life is short. You should try delicious things with delicious things. That's
no, the people on this call are only upset because you mentioned the word cocktail. Nothing to do with what actually components made up the cocktail.
Oh, do you know, I was at a whiskey show a couple months ago, and I was doing a thing for Nika, and one of my favorite things they have is the Miyagi Kill, which also has sherry barrels in the finish. And I was lucky enough that a friend of mine had made me Manhattans with them a few days before, and they were phenomenal. They were absolutely phenomenal. And he said to me, "It's like, well, you should never mess around with a good single malt." And I was like, "Man, like life is short, and I'm very glad I tasted that. If you ever get the chance, obviously, don't break the bank. There's a definitely cost to benefit ratio for everything. But if you get a chance to have a delicious cocktail with some phenomenal whiskey, I would say take that chance as responsibly and liberally as you can, I would say.
Definitely. Although I'm not sure I would put this in a cocktail. I think it's on the price point and the complexity alone. I think I think I might refrain. But I am no puritan. I do love a good whiskey cocktail. Will we start pouring the podium?
I don't see why not.
Yeah. And while we do, was there just because I'm conscious I might have cut you off on both on terms of the source of the stills and the yeast. Was there anything you wanted to add into that?
So I mean, there's a lot to talk about production wise. Still shape, because it's not a golden rule, but obviously if you're looking at upward line arms versus downward, basically I'm sure you've all seen pot stills. I don't want to teach anybody how to suck eggs or anything, but they're basically these bulbous pots, and they have a little conical neck, and then there's a little the pipe that comes off the top is called a line arm. If that goes up, it's it's easier, I should say, to produce very, very fruity stuff that will open up with dilution. If that line arm goes down, any fat that could make it up to that little hump will end up in your spirit. You tend to get oilier, thicker stuff. The Kavalan stills have an ever so slightly downward facing slump, which is very surprising to me, because I think if you do like your whiskey with water, or if you just give this one a little bit of time, this opens up the way I would expect upward facing line arms to work. And that might just be because the country is so hot. They actually need that downward line arm just to encourage some fat to come through. But if I didn't know where this was from, and you had told me it was made in Scotland, I would have guessed almost like old school Speyside side style upward facing lineups all the way, and it is not. So I know that's a bit of a weird nerdy technical thing, but it's just kind of interesting that they are able to engender such complexity with a lineup I wouldn't have expected it from.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. And it's double distilled.
Yes. Oh, I love this one. So glad I just spilled a bit of this. So we are now going over to Podium. This bad boy, I know it's the same shape of bottle as the last one. So 46%. This guy sees a little bit of virgin American oak, and you're also seeing ex-bourbon casks, most of which have actually been previously used at the distillery. So for a lot of like the Solist ex-bourbons. The youngest stuff in here is usually about 4.5 to 5 years old, up until 8. This guy is one of the ones kind of gets overlooked sometimes because people will see a ex-bourbon and virgin oak and think I already know what that tastes like. But I think if you have this, having this, of course, after King Cobra is awesome. But you can really see just how much sort of heft and crunch American oak can bring back to really, really aromatically complex whiskeys. And this actually been a while for me on this one.
But while you're sipping there, we got some like Jack, and I agree with both of them. Jack and Steph have said that it smells. Well, Jack says the nose on the podium is incredible, and Steph says smells amazing. Totally agree.
This, and I hope you see what I mean. So we had the King Cobra, which is a little bit more base, and so there's something messing around with that aroma a little bit more. This is more of wood that we're sort of used to seeing in other whiskeys, and you can really tell how much of that top note is all that heavy lifting is being done by the yeast. This, like I said, this annoyingly gets overlooked a little bit because people will see types of wood they already know. But this is an example of just how good wood treatment can affect your levels of maturation. And a couple things to say about this one, because we're going to start touching on angel share, like I was asked about, came up in the chat before, and to an extent what wood interaction is like in a country like Taiwan. Because one of the things, I'll say this first, actually. One of the first things whenever you're making whiskey is if you have, it's true with almost every type of wood, but if you have oak, most people are going to use oak, especially American oak, which is the only type of oak that Kavalan uses. Once you char the inside of that or you toast the barrel, one of the things heat will do is break down the wood sugars in that barrel. And once you've done that, alcohol will snip those up and then water sucks those out of the barrel. So bourbon, for example, which I'm sure you've probably done bourbon tastings before, bourbon is always sweeter because bourbon has to use virgin American oak. Once those sugars are gone, they don't come back. So obviously, whenever you pass on ex-bourbons to Scotch producers, they don't then suddenly have a new sort of battery of sugar to take out. Unlike tannins and vanillins, so some of the acids that form different things inside of barrels that give us more and more complex flavor over time. Tannins and vanillins, the longer they're in contact with alcohol, the more complex they'll get. The longer they get and the more they'll change. But sugar, gone. And one of the nice things about this is they've used a little bit of virgin oak to give it a little bit more sweetness. It's kind of tough against the King Cobra because that does get some of the sherry sweetness pulled through. But I think it's nowhere near a bourbon level. Nobody with a big cowboy hat and a giant belt will be happy with this, I think, if they're looking for bourbon. If they got an open mind, then who knows? But I think they've done a very, very good job of bringing over some of those softer vanillins I'm kind of used to with like the start of bourbons, some of those like almost black tea tannins, not big and crunchy like bourbon, but just a hint of those, the nicer parts of subtler American whiskeys, if I can say that, if that's not an oxymoron.
Well, I mean, yeah, I totally get. I mean, the bourbon regard, I totally agree, but it does actually remind me of a few I suppose Kentucky, Tennessee whiskeys like American single malts, a few kind of some of the ransom whiskeys and some of the distilleries you get further west that are probably using a lot of the similar cask components. It does have that kind of that feel to it. There's a particular whiskey in, is it something owl in around somewhere like Oregon, Seattle. It's very, very similar components, but no, it's interesting. The Catherine says it smells great and so smooth. Craig said heavy bourbon hit on the nose and not the cheap ones. James says, do Kavalan have a virgin oak bottling with no influence from ex-bourbon, sherry, port, etc.?
I don't think we have it over here that I'm aware of. Almost everything they use is American oak, and I've never seen just virgin oak, actually. I will have to check because I know that they may actually produce it in Taiwan and we don't get it over here, but not in the stocks that we have that I'm aware of.
Hmm.
They do a very good job of showing you influence from specific barrel, but there's no, at least I haven't seen a virgin oak only. Tough thing with that as well is not every barrel will age, even if it's like two barrels from the same part of the same tree. The grain you see in wood, that's really what alcohol's interacting with, and you can't really control that. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to do. It just wouldn't. It would kind of sit on a different, same mental plane, but different sort of mindset than the rest of the types of solo aging they do, like this guy that we're going to try in a bit.
And I suppose you've touched on the there we talking about the sugars and the bourbon and that because James and Craig had we'll go back to their question from earlier, I suppose, about the staying on the kind of cask theme, about how the climate affects the kind of aging in Taiwan.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the things I was gonna say. By the way, I forgot to tell everybody, I completely have adult ADHD, by the way. So if you ask me a small question and I start talking about bourbon, for example, at any point, feel free to just put a hand up and tell me to stop because it happens all the time. One of the reasons I was talking about the American oak, and one of the things I think is kind of cool with this one, Taiwan obviously obscenely hot and also obscenely humid. So I think in Scotland you're looking at the average. Should I explain Angel's share? Does everyone probably knows Angel's?
I think everyone on the call gets Angel's shares. Drop us a message if you don't, folks. But yeah.
So you're looking at like 3% on average in Scotland for your barrels, and like the average American hogshead is like 250 liters, so it's not that bad. In Taiwan, they go anywhere from 12 to 15% year on year. So think about aging something for 5 years' time. Think about aging it for 10. Think about aging it for 20. One of the reasons you won't see 20-year-old Taiwanese whiskey is it would just be a balsamic glaze inside of the barrel that you'd have to like Q-tip out of it. So I just saw that the comment came up saying better call it Angel's Tax. Oh, better rename it Angel's Tax. Yeah, to be fair, I mean, maybe actually that's why Taiwan's doing so well, is their angels are all drunk and helping out. Who knows? But sorry, one of the reasons I was talking about that, angel share being really high means two things. One, that you never really see really old Taiwanese whiskey. It's true as well with some of the whiskeys that come out of certain parts of India, like Bangalore with Amrit. Although they do release 10-year-old stuff, you just won't see 20, 30, 40, etc. One of the nice things about that is there's a thing that people who produce whiskey in hotter climates tend to say, which is that 1 year in a tropical country is like 5 in Scotland. And that is, it's just technically not true. It does do some stuff. It'll round out a whiskey much faster, but you don't get the same interaction you would do, because one of the things that we don't quite know what catalyzes the process yet, but one of the things that we haven't figured out yet is that we don't have control over is just time. Over time, certain things will get more and more complex. And I'll try to explain that if I can. But in a hot climate, if you've ever had new make or really young whiskey or a spirit you think wasn't quite old enough, you tend to find, at least I find anyway, rather than that nice sort of esophageal burn, you get that sort of up your sinus burn. Kind of gets you behind the face. Is kind of a weird thing to say. A lot of the things that evaporate that way are like they're stuck to alcohol, but they're just full of energy. Like they're just waiting essentially to get some oxygen or get some water or something to allow them to evaporate off the surface of the liquid. And they are full of energy. Heat actually basically helps them burn through their life cycle faster. So it doesn't age something faster, but you will definitely soften something out and round it out a lot faster in a hotter climate. Heat just helps those things that we perceive to be kind of unpleasant and slightly sort of almost like nasally astringent, they just die off faster. The thing is, and this is going to sound kind of crazy, but I ran it past two chemist friends of mine. The way tannins and vanillins work, which are two of the major things that we get flavor and color from in whiskey, take time. And if you've ever played that game Barrel of Monkeys, in fact, you know what? Should we pour out the third one? Because what I'm about to say might sound ridiculous on two whiskeys, but might make sense on the third whiskey.
That sounds like a plan. So we're coming on to the Concertmaster report now, folks. In that case, I have no idea what Barrel of Monkeys is, by the way. I don't know if anyone else does. Let us know in the comments. But
I'll explain that. I'll explain it. It's a game I think it exists over here.
Possibly. I grew up in Ireland in the 1990s. We didn't get much going. Like, the dividends of the Celtic Tiger and the European Union only really kicked in the late 90s.
Oh, well, you missed out on a whole lot of plastic from North America.
Yeah. Well, look, we won the Rose of Tralee 7 times, or not the Rose of God. That was a Freudian slip. We won the Eurovision 7 times. So that's all that matters. Like,
Yeah, exactly. I could not have put it better. So I will finish that monkey thing. I'll tell you what this is, and then we'll go back into, because it also affects this. It affects everything they produce, really. Concertmaster, very popular one. You're looking at 40% ABV. You're now looking at it's finished in ruby, tawny, and vintage port pipes for a year after being put into ex bourbons. So this probably has the most, what I call, like, chewiness. It's got the most sort of most depth and crunchiness to it. This, I think you'll still get some of those lighter, fruitier notes. This kind of shows what I think Kavalan is quite good at, is a lot of that fruit kind of bleeds into the finish. So you definitely know that there was the influence of something sweeter, heavier, and bigger there, almost like a weird chocolatey kind of cigar hit. But it doesn't lack the DNA of the aromas I think are in the other two. So this one does very, very well. I think commercially it's in quite a few bars actually near me. It's been put into drinks. Is it my favorite? Might be one of my favorites. They're all really good. I was just thinking, I don't really know which one is. But while you sip that, I will finish the story about the monkeys to kind of make vanillas and tannins make sense. Because I was explaining aging stuff in a hot climate and how heat does help some compounds burn through the life cycle, but vanillas and tannins are like this game. And Barrel of Monkeys is essentially, it's this plastic barrel. You open it up, and there are gorillas who sort of have one arm up and one arm down. And the aim of the game is you pick up.
Are they monkeys or gorillas now, Mikey? Like,
to be honest, they might even be chimps. I can't remember. They are monkey-shaped animals of some sort. But you have to pick one up by its arm, and then the game is you have to use that monkey to pick up other monkeys. And the longer the chain gets, obviously, the more and more difficult it is. And weirdly, once alcohol goes into a barrel, it usually will break down and stick to something like a vanillin or a tannin, and it'll basically have this little charge on it. So it's got like the ability to link on to something similar, kind of like those monkey arms. And the longer it's in there, the more the alcohol goes in, basically through the vascular layer of the wood, the more chance those little hooks have to grab onto more examples. So like a tannin will grab onto more of a tannin and become longer and longer and longer and more complex. And one of the things we haven't figured out how to do is make that process any faster. It is not affected by heat. To a degree, it is affected by the opening and closing of pores. So if somebody heat cycles their warehouse, or if, like, you're in Kentucky and it goes from cold to hot very quickly, that can encourage more linkage, but we don't really know what catalyzes that process. Time just seems to work, and the longer it's in the barrel, the more it'll change.
Wasn't there a Scandinavian company that claims to have been able to age whiskey in that machine? It was about 2 years ago in the news.
I know of a guy.
No, but I take your point. It's very good. Sorry, I was a curveball throwing in there. But we got Alex. We've got two what would you say, conflicting comments here, and onto what you were saying there, Mikey, because Alex has said they're monkeys because they have a tail, whereas David thinks they're Chewie, which is the big hairy thing from Star Wars. So whatever they are, I don't think they're Chewie, but sorry, that was poor. Chewy with a long finish, says David. Craig says getting cherries and figs on the nose, but more like ginger and cinnamon finish. Quite oily and chewy, very rich, and fave so far. There's some great comments. Just go back to these the chains of monkeys within the spirit. I suppose it makes sense what you're saying. You were saying Indian whiskeys, like, you know, I was drinking a Paul John recently, and you know they often say that it's, you know, a 3-year-old there is close to a 10-year-old or whatever it is in Scotland, and I'm thinking you do get those kind of some of those kind of heavier notes, but it isn't quite the same, like, you know. And I was never sure if that was down to just changes in production technique, cask sourcing, or if that was that aging process, because it's hard to kind of eliminate everything when you're I'm sure when you're studying it's not, but when you're tasting it, to realize where the differences are coming from, you know.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things as well that I've had my eyes opened a bit because I always loved Scotch. I mean, I've always loved Nika as well, but Scotch was, so I thought like that's the best. Everything should be compared to it. And then you look at other people who are making whiskey in different parts of the world. Sometimes people will make something and what they're trying to do is make Scotch in a different place, which is fine, but the Scottish are already nailing it. So why not let them make the whiskey they're good at and then try making whatever works best in your particular climate? And I think Kavalan is doing quite a good job at that. I think leaning more towards higher fruit content. And also, I mean, you have to imagine that people, if you're making it, you're going to drink it wherever you live. And I can imagine drinking something like this in a hotter climate more than I can do saying nailing a Lagavulin 16, which is like one of my desert island drams. Um, well, to be fair, any Lagavulin, if I'm being honest. I think one of the things that about which kind of took me a little while to sort of wrap my head around was they are definitely Scotch in inspiration. They've taken knowledge from everywhere else in the world, but they really are making a thing that doesn't quite taste like anywhere else. Like it's got, like I said, it's got hints of the aromatic complexity you can get in Japan, but it's very different when you get to Japanese whiskey. It's a lot more sort of like softer, lemony, almost like incense notes to it. It's got some hints of maybe guns in my face, like old school space side, like a long morning sherry finished space side something, but it's not either of those two things. It's kind of its own thing, which when somebody's doing that, I kind of appreciate. But I guess so that's personal.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Greg said getting chewy figs in the nose, but more like ginger and cinnamon finish, quite oily, chewy. Sorry, I think I've read that one already. James says, I have this for the kids at school. I'll not be able to play this game again without wanting to discuss whiskey maturation now, referring to the barrel monkeys. Alex says, is it molecular structure like carrying out the cloud and pour test, a test carried out on fuels and cold cycling?
I would love to pretend I know what a cloud and pour test is, but I don't.
Fair
So
enough.
I'm going to say I don't know. Is it molecular structure in reference to the monkey?
In reference to, I suppose, the alcohol molecules, the molecules which you were euphemizing as monkeys.
I mean, I think I understand what you're saying. Like, yeah, to a degree, really, whatever. When you're looking at flavor, and stop me if this gets boring. When you're looking at flavor and booze, whenever you distill, you're going to be drawing through alcohol. Ethanol is the one you want. You'll get some water. You tend to get acids and amino acids and fats. And when that enters into a barrel, not just alcohol, but alcohol will start breaking down the molecular structure of wood and kind of snipping things into smaller bits so they can then attach onto, and it pulls those out of the wood. So, so much so that really the chemical signature of the liquid will change. And one of my favorite quotes actually is from a guy who I know who has worked on a hyper aging reactor. He's in Las Vegas right now. But if you've ever been around a baby who is milk fed and they vomit, I think I call it butyric. I'm not sure if you call it butyric or not, but that weird, sickly, sweet smell that actually some American companies add to their chocolate to make it seem more chocolatey. That weird baby vomit acid, when it's in the presence of hemicellulose and lignin breaking down in barrels, chemically changes over time into something identical to like fermented New World tobacco. So it does literally, you're not really just like infusing wood flavor into something. You are actually chemically changing what's stuck to the alcohol, which I think is one of the reasons why whiskey has got so much breadth. I mean, every single part matters, but maturation is such a crazy, weird thing with such a lack of control. You can get really, really cool stuff if you kind of know what you're tweaking.
I get what you're saying, Mikey. You're saying people who spend a lot of money on vodka are weirdos.
Yeah, I mean, read between the lines, but yeah, definitely.
By that I mean buying expensive vodkas, not drinking vodka frequently.
I've never really understood the luxury vodka game personally, but they're not marketing at me, so what do I know? Who knows? But yes, I
guarantee they're not marketing at me either with my bank balance. Jack, so did we get the age of the concertmaster? Did you? I don't think we did. How old was this one?
The youngest you'll ever see in anything is going to be 4.5. I think Concertmaster usually averages out closer to 5 to 8, rather than 4.5 to 8, which doesn't sound like much, but again, much of a difference. But you're not talking about Scotland; you're talking 4.5 in very, very humid, very hot country.
And I suppose that this is the bit we're missing from well, I suppose go on, finish, because that you give a minimum there, and I presume the question was asked about the maximum. But
Eight'll be the top you see in especially that shape bottle, which is where did I have one of them in this shape. It'll never be over 8 in one of these. Not for any like judgy reason. It's just normally these guys are about showing off this sort of distillery blueprint with adding 1 or 2 notes to it. So they have like a distillery select, which is slightly more Oloroso sherry. They've got one that's almost entirely ex-bourbon. When you get to the bottles that are this shaped, it can get a little bit older, but it's always to taste. Really, when it's good is when they'll take it out and put it into something.
Brilliant. James says, I'm getting tropical here: rhubarb and custard, hard boiled sweets, and lilt. Lilt is actually a fantastic tasting note. Brilliant. I can totally get what you mean as well. Ian said, what a mix of casks do you have in this? So obviously it's port casks. So what else is in it?
So you're looking at predominantly ex-bourbon. This will be second and third fill. So they'll make stuff like the Solist bourbons and their own and some of the Podium. And then what did I say? I can't remember now. Ruby, Tawny, and let's just look it up because on my work laptop, I totally forgot. Did I get it right? Ruby, Tawny, and vintage port pipes for a year.
Marvelous. Fantastic. And I suppose we spoke there about minimum age statements and distillation. That in terms of regulation, what are they allowed to do and or not allowed to do in Taiwan?
In Taiwan, there are people producing stuff that you would not legally be able to import to this country as whiskey. They have to say, whatever you see over here, that like if you go to the Whiskey Exchange or Master of Malt or any local retailer or look online.
What's the Whiskey Exchange or Master of Malt? I'm not aware of these companies.
These smaller losers,
right?
Local indie retailers, or I can't think of, because there's no real way.
Oddbins, maybe, or
yeah. What's a really trashy one? Oddbins. What's the one? Oh, it might not actually be a chain, so maybe I won't mention the one I live next to.
Although let's say, okay, so you go into the whiskey shop, right?
So you go into the whiskey shop. You can't really you wouldn't be able to label it as whiskey, basically. Whatever you find in this country, if it says Taiwanese whiskey on it, has to adhere basically to our laws of production. So it can't, even some American stuff that's 2 years old or younger, or you won't see over here. I know that Kavalan is no longer the only Taiwanese whiskey over here. I think some of the stuff that the government used to produce is now being brought over here. But if you see, it's not just true for Taiwan. If you see anybody over here, you're basically looking at our law. So 3 years and a day would have to be their minimum. There aren't really many people who bother, though, exporting something over with companies of this size, like family-owned smaller companies. So they're just trying to sell you over their cheapest thing. They normally have to compete. And actually, England is one of the best places to get booze because the competition is so good that people have to send over better stuff here usually. So you never really, if you ever pick up something and you're not sure about it, by all means, Google it. But if you see like a new, I don't know, Fijian whiskey, and it's come over here, odds are probably high that they've had to make something good enough to compete over here to even ship it over. So although I know age statements are very important, especially when people are buying stuff, especially to keep or for special occasions, I'd say don't worry too much about it if they haven't put an age statement on it, unless the branding or the website or whatever gives you shady vibes. Look it up, but if not, give it a try first. It probably won't be as important as at least comparatively as fair as it would be for Scotch. It's a very long roundabout way of saying.
No, that's good. I have a kind of follow-up question to that. I don't know if anyone else has any questions in the chat, but maybe we'll come on to the next one first. The triple sherry cask, I believe it is.
This bad boy here.
Looks like it, yeah. while we're pouring that, James has said probably an absurd question, but is there any way they can climate control in the warehouse that gives a best of both worlds scenario on the maturation process, or is it just not worth it and embrace what you get scenario? So James doesn't believe in climate change, but putting that aside, what you think of James's question there?
You can't. So there are people who do operate high levels of essentially climate control in warehouses. People will sometimes do a thing called heat cycling, where they're on purpose engender massive changes from hot to cold. In Kavalan, they don't. It's a 5-story concrete brick essentially, and the temperature control is whether or not you open the windows or not. Although I do know that they did 3 or 4 years ago put some stuff in some of the caves nearby the distillery, which is in Yilan County, which is a very idyllic part of Taiwan. But I think the idea was, because you're in that climate and you're going to make Taiwanese whiskey, there's no real point to making a large building that requires a lot of air conditioning and humidity control. You're in Taiwan, you should make Taiwanese whiskey. Also good, because with climate change being mentioned, you don't want the carbon footprint of a bottle of whiskey to be like astronomically high. So I like this stuff. I'm kind of glad they haven't bothered. You could, though, by all means, and there are people who do, there are measures you can take to have much more control over the way your whiskey ages. Kavalan just does not. They kind of allow the place where they make it to influence what they're making. I do know of one commercial distillery that's actually installing, I think in the next year, they're trying to install what's effectively it's a combination of plastic and fruit waxes, but this sheath around the inside of their aging warehouse, so they can capture all the evaporating booze and then chill that back down to liquid to reuse. I hope it is so economically expensive that it's not worthwhile, but people are trying to exercise that level of control. So they aren't, but that
to reclaim the angel share. It's like recycled toilet paper. It just feels wrong. Like I said, is there a particular river that feeds into the Kavalan distillery?
Yeah, so one of the reasons they chose the location of the distillery, which is in Yilan, I hope I'm saying that right, Yilan County, actually gets meltwater from the mountains in Taiwan. So like most distilleries, the key thing you're normally looking for is softness, although mineral content can sometimes benefit flavor. In this case, you're mostly looking for the softness of the water, but Yilan County is like a national park, incredibly beautiful, almost no tainting of the water, no pollution, no like London style pumping sewage into everything everywhere, which I've just learned about today. Very green, very nice, very good for the environment, and completely. I think it's what's now called a primary water source. So it is where moisture has hit mountainous rock and then gone through rock to be essentially filtered, and is one of the cleanest natural sources you can get. They say it's beautiful,
that sounds good. Alex has said Trump said that global warming doesn't exist, but he applied for a flood wall in one of his golf courses, maybe Doombeg, citing climate change on his planning permission. So,
I think
we'll come on to the sorry.
So coming from Toronto, we had wildfires today, which in my mind, somewhat meanly, I suppose, like, isn't that Los Angeles's problem? Why is that a Toronto problem? So I'm pretty sure it exists, but if you disagree with me, don't bother telling me, because I don't care.
Still buy Kavalan if you disagree.
Yeah, just buy Kavalan either way.
Stephen Fisher has just left the chat, so that's obviously. Sorry, Stephen. This is it's Mikey's personal opinion. He does not speak on behalf of Kavalan.
Or Speciality or anybody really. Probably not even myself, given all the ADHD.
Brilliant. So do you want to tell us about this triple sherry cask?
So triple sherry is basically exactly what it says in the tin. You're looking at ex Pedro Jimenez, ex Oloroso, and ex Muscatel for the sherries in this. Although you can, Pedro Jimenez, if you don't know sherries, Pedro Jimenez liquid raisins. It doesn't matter how cheap it gets. I've never had a bad one. It's just always good. You can pour it on vanilla ice cream. You can add it to coffee. You can do pretty much anything with it, and it's always good. When you look at Oloroso, Amontillado, you tend to see those utilized to add It doesn't really affect, but kind of adds like this nutty quality to some of the things you get out of oak normally. I mean, you're always of course looking for, I think you're always looking for sherry influence. So some of the actual rancio flavor you get in that kind of bodega funk. Muscatel in this case, I think, has been brought in because it's I haven't seen it utilized as often as Pedro Jimenez. Pedro Jimenez is one of the go-tos for a lot of people, as is Oloroso and Amontillado. But Muscatel, I think, in this case, has really brought the tail end of that top almost apricot note and given it like a, I don't know, really golden honeyed kind of semi-tropical funk. I have to admit, I didn't want to like this one because I work in the whiskey industry. I'm like, oh, more sherry. But sherry's delicious and whiskey's delicious, and I was completely wrong. And this is also very, very good, I think. And I hope you'll agree. This kind of does, if you're looking for like, oh, who was the like Lagavulin Distillers Edition and like Pedro Jimenez and smoke and big clashes of like funky darkness. That's all Scotland. This is like what having a phenomenal sherry swizzle pina colada would be like on a beach in southern Taiwan for me. But a very classy one, a very whiskey focused, classy one, I think. What do we think of this one? This is, to me, it's one of the annoyingly good ones that I like. Kind of wish I didn't as much, but I do. Any thoughts? Oh, sorry. I forgot about the chat. I was asking for any thoughts and I forgot. Nobody can speak.
Sorry, I was actually chatting away and I had myself on mute and I didn't realize. So I was actually saying the Velvety Raisin PX is Alex. David and Catherine says I get a whiff of new Carcent on the nose, leather maybe. Love a sherry cask. This one's one of the best I've had in a while. Delicious. James says this ABV, it's very easy drinking. Dangerous bottle. Now David has said new car. All I can think of is a fresh car floor mat when sniffing. Very nice. Really can't go wrong with it. Easy crowd pleaser. Considering the ABV, what is it on this? Oh, this is 40%. So we're dropping. I was going to say I was actually looking at the ABV on the next one. But yeah, I was going to say it doesn't taste that strong. But so this is actually lower though than the most ones we tried so far, isn't it? So the last one, the Concertmaster, was 40, and then the other two were 46.
Yeah, the Concertmaster and this one are the other two at 40.
Yeah. And so the ones that are over 46, is there chill filtration in there? What's the process in that regard for all four, not just this one we're drinking now?
I don't think they do a single chill filtered thing, actually. Let me just check, because it kind of would defeat a lot of the purpose for
It's very difficult to have this at 40% and for it to stay stable without some form of filtration, though.
Well, the thing is,
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just
sorry. They do for the distillery selects, which we're not tasting today, and for the Kavalan Classic. Although it says no chill filtration for this one.
That's fascinating. Interesting.
So the only thing I will say about, because actually this is a thing I've learned through Michter's, which is a great American whiskey. I, for a long time, was like, oh, chill filtration. I'll just describe it anyway, just even if you know what it is. It was designed for if you wanted to ship whiskey all over the world, you take your liquid, you reduce the temperature down to where the fats will start to crystallize, and then you push that through a filter, removing those fats. And it means you can send it anywhere it can get cold and hot, and your whiskey will never get cloudy. The thing is, you are always going to remove some flavor. It doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but some things that break down and come out of wood are more soluble in fats than they are in alcohol or water. So, for example, water is the best thing at pulling sugar out of barrels. So if you like sweeter bourbons, look for people who fill the barrel at lower ABV. If you want to, smoke and fat is the easiest one to tell. Downward facing line arms, big, punchy, oily whiskeys. A lot of the phenol or phenolic compounds you can get off burning stuff will really soak into fat. So if you have a lot of fat content in your whiskey and you want to basically, if you want to smell the smoke and then breathe out and get more and more complexity in the smoke, you're going to want more and more fat. I used to think that chill filtering was a bad thing, but then I met the guys from Michter's and they basically taught me that some people chill filter for flavor. So they will change the micron size of the holes in the filters to remove specific fats that attach to specific flavors. This is new information for me. I would love to tell you what specific threshold you get to taste what versus, but the only thing I will say is anybody who does that, usually I kind of hate to say this because it feels like I'm definitely biased because I work with mixers and I work with Kavalan. But if you're going to chill filter for flavor, you are definitely doing it because you love the product, because chill filters are insanely expensive. The distillery I used to work in, getting a chill filter for the small distillery I worked in, the chill filter was almost as expensive as 1.5 of our stills without a replaceable micron filter. So if anybody ever says we do chill filter, but we do it for flavor, they've quite literally put some of their money where their mouth is, which is rarer than it should be, but kind of cool, I think.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think more cynically they're doing it so they can get the ABV down to 40 without any
this one probably
complications.
Yeah.
The Andy said fairly complex at 40%. It's his favorite of the night so far. Jack says, what countries Kavalan, which is actually I was going to ask actually this a similar type of question, so I might roll them into two. Jack says, what countries is Kavalan most popular in? I know it's quite popular in South Korea, but hard to get a hold of there lately. And I suppose you were saying about the kind of importing into the UK and brands sending in their best so it can compete in that market and that side of things. Kavalan obviously has a complex trade relationship with some of the world in terms of recognition of its government, and we won't get into the politics of it all. Is there markets that it does stronger in? On Jack's question, is it where is it most stronger? Is there markets it can't get into? How does that work?
Taiwan, I mean, it sells the most in Taiwan, unsurprisingly. It does pretty well in the UK. France buys an obscene amount of it, but France buys a lot of whiskey, to be fair. I don't know actually about America, to be fair. I know that it does fairly well in a couple of states, but America is very different because each state has its own laws about importation. So it's very hard to get one product all over the place unless you're huge. I know there is a tiny footprint in the rest of Asia. It's sold somewhat in Japan. It's sold a little bit, sorry, but it is actually sold relatively well in China. It's picking up more in China. One of the reasons, actually, this is evidence for it. The triple sherry, I don't know if you can see it on this bottle because it's all reflecting, but they've actually kept, I'll forget the name of, I know what it's called in Japanese because they stole all the words from it, katakana, but I forget what the Chinese alphabet call it. But it's got the Chinese importation characters for not Cantonese.
Mandarin,
thank you. So they do pretty well in China as well. Beyond that, I'm not really sure. We don't really, with Speciality, we look after them only in the UK. Everything I'm telling you is just through people I know who either work with them or work with booze in other parts of the world. So it may sell phenomenally well in Argentina, but I just wouldn't know that. They would have to compete with Fernet Branca in Argentina, which is probably never gonna.
Yeah,
I think.
I mean, it's funny. You say Fernet Branca there. I mean, even thinking about the the French. I mean, I was in France over the summer, and like I love the country, but it's just bizarre their obsession with whiskey, and particularly like Japanese whiskeys everywhere, and Irish. It's for a country that produces these phenomenal Armagnacs and cognacs and Calvados, these eau de vies. You're like, there's this massive spirit heritage, and yet they drink so much whiskey. It's great, but it's just, I always find it funny.
Well, the thing is, if you make good stuff, you probably have good taste. So if they're drinking Irish and Japanese whiskey, it's probably pretty well made. So
this is true. And their excise duties is lower, so you can buy nice bottles of Connemara Irish whiskey in there for way cheaper than you can in Ireland. So it's great. Marvelous. Well, Mela said black tea, cherry, oak, malty, prunes, nice. Black tea's actually come up a small bit tonight as well, and that's I totally agree with that taste. Not just in terms of the flavor, but also the kind of the hint of tannins. 100%. I think it's a really spot on tasting note. Will we come on to the last dram now?
Yeah, sure. Also, I will say if you like tea, I'm also a little bit of a, I don't know, wannabe tea nerd, but Taiwan makes some of the best, I think the best oolong tea in the entire world, bar none. And this is a bit of a weird bartender cheat code, but if you ever get a bottle of something you don't think is particularly good, get some good loose leaf oolong, put it into the booze. The only key thing is don't squeeze that tea out afterwards. Breaking the tea will actually release tannins and make it a lot more astringent, but oolong tea in any booze makes it better. If it's already good, don't bother. But if you have a bottle of something that doesn't quite hit the mark, try infusing it with oolong tea and it'll be phenomenal. Just totally killed my darling there. That's a bartending secret I've kept for 20 plus years. But
I'm glad we could squeeze it out of you. I hope it hasn't broken any tannins into your tasting tonight. The speaking of oolong tea, I have a friend who's an anarchist. Will only drink it because proper tea is theft. So
I'm gonna steal that. I'm gonna steal that joke.
So Solist port. We'll come on to this one. I think it was the Solist. I was saying at the very, very start of tasting the Vino Baroque cask finish, the first Kavalan trial. I think it was the Solist as well. What's the concept behind that kind of series within the Kavalan range?
So I found it a bit confusing at first. Solist just means without the influence of anything else, really. It's often misquoted as being soloist because Kavalan has like Concertmaster, Podium, a bunch of other references to especially classical music. When you're looking at Solist, it is not ex-bourbon then something. It is not virgin oak then something else. It will be that one thing. So if it says ex-bourbon, it's Solist ex-bourbon. It's just ex-bourbon, one ex-bourbon cask. If it's Solist export, it will be one export cask. They go to quite great lengths to get their hands on phenomenally good barrels. And actually, one of the things I should say now, because it's one of the things Kavalan's also contributed to the overall whiskey market. I'm sure in a room full of whiskey nerds, you've heard of Jim Swan before, the late Jim Swan, actually. He was one of the guys who helped sort of pioneer Kavalan's approach to the way they treat oak. And they basically pioneered the STR method, so shave, toasting, and recharring. So it doesn't come into this, but it's just worth talking about now before we get into this one. With shave, toasting, and recharring, you basically get a barrel. You always pick one that's made of particularly well-conditioned wood. You open it up, you look at the staves, you see how far the alcohol has penetrated into the wood, which is very easy to do even by the eye. You then shave down to that layer, toast the wood slightly, and then rechar the inside. And it's basically a very good way of making sure you've used up every single layer of that wood. And one of the reasons they started doing this was, and it's much more common now in whiskey production. You used to see reconditioned barrels a lot where they would do a similar thing, but STRing was kind of developed by them. And what they do particularly well is buy up not just X red wine, but let's say X wine predominantly, really, really good American oak made barrels that have aged something like wine that doesn't penetrate too far into the wood. Then basically taken that wood that's been treated very, very well and recondition that so it's essentially a brand new barrel. And it means you're getting, it's very, very, it's not, you can't really control aging to any degree, but it's very consistent in the Venn diagram of aging. It's very, very good at producing consistent product. And you tend not to get too much in the way of tannin development. So whenever you cut down an oak tree, you'll cut it into staves. You let those staves dry out. You can use a kiln or an oven to dry those out quite quickly and still produce good whiskey. But one of the things oxygen and time will do is break tannins down into a way that it's more easy it's more easy for alcohol to attach to those things and draw out very complex, very nuanced tannins that are almost the same shape. And so basically give you really, really pleasant flavors to us. So it's not unique to them anymore, but Kavalan did pioneer the STR method. And in learning so much about wood, they also learned that when you have a particularly good product, say it's a particularly good port or a particularly good sherry, there is no reason not to use phenomenal wood, even if it's got influence from other spirits, then age whatever your spirit is. So when you see Solist, whatever it says on the bottle, in this case being a port cask, stop reflecting. All you are tasting is a port cask's influence on the Kavalan new make. So there are a lot of them. I have not had a bad one yet. They have Fino, Amontillado, Oloroso, Port, just ex-bourbon. Vino Barrique is the only one I'm aware of that uses more than one barrel. So that's a combination of red and white sweet wines, but they're kind of very, very cool for showing you how much the exfil brings to a spirit. So when you get familiar with the product itself through things like the Podium and the King Car, I think in particular, and then taste what Solist has done, it's a different beast. You can kind of taste the touch points and sort of the DNA of Kavalan, but see just how much the port cask has brought to that spirit and changed it as well.
It's got a gorgeous nose. Jack has said even at almost 60%, it's not overpowering in alcohol. It's a beautiful whiskey. My favorite tonight next to the Podium. Is the Solist the natural color? Says Steph.
Kavalan doesn't add any distiller's caramel to anything. So this all comes out from, and actually you can see because there are maybe even have one. Now this is their. They've stopped doing these ridiculous boxes, by the way. Not for all of them, but for most of them. This is the Solist X Bourbon, which we were also considering tasting, but much lighter. But of course, if you put it into X Port, which is much darker, you get that color. So this is mostly to do with the fact that it's X Port.
Craig says perfect after dinner dram. Easily could be drunk instead of a brandy. I haven't actually tasted it yet, so I'm gonna tuck in. But by the nose of it, I totally agree with Craig.
This is actually my first time tasting this one. This has been sitting in my closet with no excuse to open till now. So thank you, everyone. Much appreciated. Whew.
Wow, that is good. It'd definitely be drank with a brandy, or instead of a brandy, yeah, but maybe with some cheese.
Absolutely. Oh, I almost kind of like chocolatey, almost like a good kind of dark chocolate kind of crunch to it.
I get that chocolate. Some black grapes. I don't know. It's interesting. It's complex. It's good. Mel has gone dark berries. I suppose it's coca, ginger. Hottest one of the night in heat for me.
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Soon mellows, and then getting desserts, fudge, toffee, chocolate. Steph says after it, fantastic tasting note. But Mel's is very good. Spot on, I think. James says, I've had a number of the Solist casks over the years. I can't fault any of them. What Kavalan do is magical, especially in terms of the Solist casks. So that's high praise from James there. Would you recommend a drop of water in this, Mikey? Or you haven't tried it before, have you?
I haven't tried this one before. I probably will, just to see how it changes. But yeah, I'm actually again, I work for the company, everything I say with a pinch of salt, but I think this is very good. Like this is a really, really cool, as a genuine whiskey nerd, this is a cool thing to taste because now, although you get some idea, like whenever you have, let's say, a port finished Talisker or something, you're already familiar with the base spirit. You can tell that there's a difference to it. With Kavalan, because when you get to a Solist, you are just tasting what that barrel has brought in. I, to my discredit, was very cynical when I first saw the range. Like, oh, they're all pretty expensive. What's the point? And then I taste them, and they actually they help me appreciate other stuff and other expressions, other brands more, which I like. I always like it when something kind of fits other stuff into this bigger ball of knowledge, so to speak. But yeah, I'm very, very pleasantly surprised with this. This is very good.
Just to another, there's a couple of the SKUs on tonight, or the whiskies that we're trying tonight, aren't showing up on the website yet. I'm hoping to get that sorted ASAP. But bulk of them are, and when we email out the tasting link, hopefully by then I'll have them done, so you can just use the discount straight away there. So I don't have this in front of me. Do you know what this normally retails at, Mikey? And do you know how many, in terms of the Solist, what kind of volume are they produced in?
Solist is weird because we get them in sort of parcels. So we get them every 3 months. And we always get Vino Barrique is the one that is around a lot because it won a lot of the awards. So we tend to have enough of that. It's not like always, there's not loads of it always available, but it's usually around. The last one we got in, I got an email actually just before our 2-day-long company meeting. The last one we got in was, I think, a Fino and Amontillado cask, and port cask, I think, came in just before that. But I have no, I'm going to say 180, but don't quote me on that. I'll just look it up.
I'll see what it says on might be able to bring it up on our stock system here, even though it's not live on the website. So I'll see if I can do that, and it'll tell you what we've been.
I can't connect my company stock system right now. Come on, Microsoft Teams.
Yeah, I think it's probably be around 160, I'd say.
Yeah, I actually can't get into my Microsoft Teams account right now. But they're all around that. They're usually 100 plus. I think the only time it gets more expensive than that is if it's something weird. Like the Pheno is much rarer, the Solist Pheno, because there's less good Pheno barrels around. I think kind of worth it though, personally.
What was that? Sorry.
I think it's worth it personally.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. We've definitely. I won't say which ones, but the regulars on here will know we've tried some whiskies that are well over the 200 mark that that definitely don't pack as much into it as this. So yeah, no, definitely. I suppose we're getting to that point in the night where we want to know everyone's favorite by preference. Mela said this is
Yes,
by
please.
far the best for me tonight. Long after taste keeps coming through, I think a bottle wouldn't last too long.
Yeah.
Would be just one more. I'm thinking it has got a tremendous finish to it. You're totally right, Mel. I have a feeling this might be people's favorite on the night, but we do want to hear what you preferred in order. I'll stick the discount code into the chat there. It's WS16KAV. And that will give you 15% off the SKUs you try tonight. Now, as I say, the two of them aren't showing. They're the ones that we were stocking, especially for this tasting, and they're not live yet. But I'll hopefully get that sorted ASAP. Ian's gone with 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So that is going with the Solist and then the triple sherry. Steph's gone with 5, 1, which is the King Car. It's the Solist followed by the King Car. That's interesting. Ian says Solist Podium, triple sherry, Concertmaster. Tied between Podium and Solist.
I see this a lot because King Car is kind of one of those ones that people will either really like and get what that nuttiness brings to the fruit, or they go, what is no, I want the fruit plus the stuff like plus crunchier sherry and bigger base notes.
Look, Kirsty's least favorite one is this Solist, and she's gone with the triple sherry, followed by the King Car. So that's really interesting. Mel has gone for Solist. Russell has gone for the King Car, then the Solist.
Russell's got King Car first.
There's a couple of podiums in there. I think definitely the Solist is coming out on top, but it's good. I don't say this in every tasting, but I have said it on actually more than not recently, which maybe says maybe it's my taste is slipping, or maybe the tastings have just been quite good. But it's always great when there's no when there's a variety. I know, I mean, there is a clear it's definitely just Solist is people's favorite. But when there's not a clear order, like, you know, often you can do tastings and they start with their cheap entry one and then you finish an expensive one, and then when everyone gives their preference, you basically go back down through the range that you tried. It's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is how I liked it, and that's also how they're priced. But so it's good to get them mixed up a bit. Steph said King Car was the first Kavalan I ever tried at the whiskey shop in Guildford. Ian says overall very pleasantly surprised at them all given my previous Kavalan experience. I presume you weren't a fan of Kavalan in the past, Ian. So I'm
glad we turned that around. That's good news.
Definitely. Jim has gone for number 3, which was the Concertmaster port. It's an interesting one. And he's gone for Solist. Is great, would be a treat. So there's some absolute tremendous whiskies in there. And thank you everyone for joining and for your feedback, both right now as we're speaking, and also in future, if you're watching this in the future at the tasting, or on the recording. Sorry, Jesus, those 5 whiskeys gone to my head. So I've just put the discount code in there again. Thanks, Mikey, for joining us. Is there anything you wanted to part with in terms of any information on Kavalan, or is there anyone who wanted to get in a quick question before we finish up? Alex has said, what is your favorite Asian whiskey brand?
That's tough. Because I didn't used to like whiskey. I used to work in a bar and I had a girlfriend who did, and I actually bought the Michael Jackson whiskey book to learn why I hated it, to tell her that she was wrong. And in so doing, tasted through stuff, and I cannot lie, there were 2 whiskeys in one night that turned my perception around. One of them was Scapa 16, which used to be the only way you could find Scapa. But the other was Nika from the Barrel, that little square, beautiful bottle of absolutely delicious gold. And even though there are expressions of Kavalan, I think maybe on, like, if I was on a judging panel, or potentially better, they're not in my heart. So for me, Nika will probably be my favorite brand, just because From the Barrel is one of those things. I think you could be at a table with somebody who loves peaty scotch, a cowboy who's going to throw his hat in the air and shoot it, and I don't know, a Highlander with a giant claymore, and you put that bottle down, and they're all going to be happy. So for that reason, because that was my entry point, that's going to be probably number one. Kavalan is genuinely very good. It's one of my favorite brands. I think people who look at and change part of the process, especially when they mess around with yeast. I know this is a bit of a nerdy take, but when someone goes, yield's important, but flavor is more important, I'm always listening. I always want to taste whatever it is they're putting out. Chichibu out of Japan is very good. Amrit is phenomenal. People who buy it, it's like a cult. People who buy it know about it. People who've never heard of it before haven't. The only piece of advice I will give you when it comes to Amrit is, if the branding, and pardon my French, if the branding is really shitty, it's because it's so good they've never had to update it. So you might see ones that look like you designed it on a PowerPoint by yourself, but those are really good. So those are some ones to look out for.
No, that's good. Some tremendous fence sitting there, Mikey. I'm very impressed. Jameson, thanks for a great tasting. I'm a peat freak, but Kavalan goes a long way with me. That's always tell people who say they don't like whiskey is to just wet your lips and taste, then repeat, then move on to sips. No, that's good advice. Ian says, I agree with the two whiskeys to turn around perception. Same happened to me. David said, is there an independent bottling scene in Taiwan?
Not that I know of. If there is, because the only way we work sort of directly with Kavalan, but we're not privy to anybody buying up casks from them. I know that we're starting to talk to them about getting independent casks or single casks from them. I don't know who else they work with so far. They probably have sold some stuff to La Maison de Whisky, which is a French company who buys a lot of it. They're a massive.
Yeah, I have definitely seen some Kavalan single casks, brand bottles, especially for La Maison de Whisky. Yeah.
But beyond what I've seen, I don't know really. I know that we're going to start trying to do some, or at least I say that. But don't hold your breath. In my experience with the distilling industry, we've begun talks about it now, which means maybe next year I'll be like, if it doesn't come in one more year, I'll blow everything up. So you might see it eventually. But beyond us, I don't really know. Whatever I say, I'd be making up. So I can't tell you really. There's probably some of it out there, but I don't know how much.
And maybe our last question for the night, we'll go with Alex's. What's your favorite London whiskey bar / London cocktail bar?
Ooh. Tough. Black Rock is very good for a whiskey bar. You're just never disappointed. If you've not been, they have a giant table that's made of a cross section of a tree, and they'll always have a cocktail with something aging in it. But their whiskey cabinet is always arranged by price, and the people there always know what they're talking about. You just walk in and say, I'm kind of in the mood for X, Y, and Z, and they usually pretty much nail it. Cocktail bar wise, though, Satan's Whiskers is great. It's all classics. It's not too far from Bethnal Green, so it's a bit out east, but it's like a quick stumble to the tube, so it's not far at all. The other one is, and I returned there recently after our 2-day company meeting. It's a place called Cocktail Trading Company, and if you look it up, they do very Instagrammable cocktails. So you might think, oh, it's like a fun party place to go, and dismiss it, but their drinks are so dialed in. I went for one martini and ended up staying for, let's say 2. It was 5. It was very, very, very good. So it's a cocktail trading company, Satan's Whiskers, Black Rock.
That sounds good. I Black Rock is a tremendous bar. I've been there, been there several times. It's great. The other one not too far from Black Rock is actually Taylor and Elemental.
Yes, yeah.
Won the second very good whiskey bar in the world or whatever this year. I was there last year. It's expensive, but it's an impressive experience. The VCC, or not the VCC, the Experimental Cocktail Club. VCC is a bar in Dublin. The Experimental Cocktail Club in near Chinatown.
Oh yes, yeah, actually, good shout. I haven't been there in a
They
while. I forgot about that
they
place.
do a cocktail called the Whiskey Tree. It's got like 9 different whiskeys in it, and it's amazing. You don't think it's going to work, but it works well.
I make that cocktail most nights in my belly. So,
Alex has loved Milroy's great atmosphere.
oh, Milroy's, of course.
Milroy's is so
Oh
it's a
man,
good show.
Milroy, and they do such good. They have a highball system now on tap, which
Oh,
is
do they?
annoyingly good. I walked in, they did Nika. I'm not even making this up. Nika Days and Appletizer. They recarbonated it in the Cornelius keg to give it more bubbles. Phenomenal.
That
Except
sounds amazing.
it hurt my bartender pride to have that. And like, this is really good. It was really, really good.
My
Yes,
my other
I
half
forgot about Melrose.
my other half's in London right now at the London Whisky Show or whatever is on today. There's always a whiskey show on somewhere. And so I must message her these bar suggestions. Listen, Mikey, thank you for joining us. Everyone else, really, really genuinely, as always, delighted that you've joined the call tonight. We've got a Diageo special release tasting and a Nika tasting coming up. There's a couple of more we're just waiting to confirm. I was hoping to get some of them on sale this week, but there's been slight delays, so hopefully we'll be in the next few days up on sale. And they would be at the end of the month, kind of start of October. So keep an eye out for them. Thanks for joining. And if there's any issues or anything we didn't get to tonight, just reply to the link you got the Zoom from and we'll get them sorted. And the 2 SKUs that aren't showing up, hopefully we'll get them sorted ASAP. So brilliant. Mikey, thanks again. We'll hopefully have you on again down the line. You never know.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I'll also just like to say thank you, everybody. I know it's Thursday evening. Is it Thursday? Thank you for your time. I love this is my favorite type of thing to do. So I'm very happy doing this. More than happy to come back. Yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it. I appreciate your time.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And we'll see you all again soon, folks. Bye-bye.